The political career of Francis Bacon. Bacon was born on January 22, 1561, at York House, London, the residence of his father, Sir Nicholas Bacon, who for the first 20 years of Elizabeth's reign had been Keeper of the Great Seal. The fame of the father, says Macaulay, has been thrown into the shade by that of the son, but Sir Nicholas was no ordinary man. It is as one might have expected, for genius is an apex to which a family builds itself through talent, and through talent in the genius's offspring subsides again towards the mediocrity of man. Bacon's mother was Lady Anne Cook, sister-in-law of Sir William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who was Elizabeth's Lord Treasurer and one of the most powerful men in England. Her father had been chief tutor of King Edward VI. She herself was a linguist and a theologian, and thought nothing of corresponding in Greek with bishops. She made herself instructress of her son, and spared no pains in his education. But the real nurse of Bacon's greatness was Elizabethan England, the greatest age of the most powerful of modern nations. The discovery of America had diverted trade from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, had raised the Atlantic nations, Spain and France and Holland and England, to that commercial and financial supremacy which had been Italy's when half of Europe had made her its port of entry and exit in the Eastern trade. And with this change, the Renaissance had passed from Florence and Rome and Milan and Venice to Madrid and Paris and Amsterdam and London. After the destruction of the Spanish naval power in 1588, the commerce of England spread over every sea. Her towns throve with domestic industry, her sailors circumnavigated the globe, and her captains won America. Her literature blossomed into Spenser's poetry and Sidney's prose. Her stage throbbed with the dramas of Shakespeare and Marlowe and Ben Jonson and 100 vigorous pens. No man could fail to flourish in such a time and country, if there was seed in him at all. At the age of 12, Bacon was sent to Trinity College, Cambridge. He stayed there 3 years and left it with a strong dislike of its texts and methods, a confirmed hostility to the cult of Aristotle, and a resolve to set philosophy into a more fertile path, to turn it from scholastic disputation to the illumination and increase of human good. Though still a lad of 16, he was offered an appointment to the staff of the English ambassador in France, and after careful casting up of pros and cons, he accepted. In the proem to The Interpretation of Nature, he discusses this fateful decision that turned him from philosophy to politics. It is an indispensable passage. Whereas I believed myself born for the service of mankind, and reckoned the care of the commonweal to be among those duties that are of public right, open to all alike, even as the waters and the air, I therefore asked myself what could most advantage mankind, and for the performance of what tasks I seemed to be shaped by nature. But when I searched, I found no work so meritorious as the discovery and development of the arts and inventions that tend to civilize the life of man. Above all, if any man could succeed, not merely in bringing to light some one particular invention, however useful, but in kindling in nature a luminary which would, at its first rising, shed some light on the present limits and borders of human discoveries, and which afterwards, as it rose still higher, would reveal and bring into clear view every nook and cranny of darkness. It seemed to me that such a discoverer would deserve to be called the true extender of the kingdom of man over the universe, the champion of human liberty, and the exterminator of the necessities that now keep men in bondage. Moreover, I found in my own nature a special adaptation for the contemplation of truth. For I had a mind at once versatile enough for that most important object, I mean the recognition of similitudes, and at the same time sufficiently steady and concentrated for the observation of subtle shades of difference. I possessed a passion for research, a power of suspending judgment with patience, of meditating with pleasure, of assenting with caution, of correcting false impressions with readiness, and of arranging my thoughts with scrupulous pains. I had no hankering after novelty, no blind admiration for antiquity. Imposture in every shape I utterly detested. For all these reasons I considered that my nature and disposition had, as it were, a kind of kinship and connection with truth. But my birth, my rearing, and education had all pointed not toward philosophy, but towards politics. I had been, as it were, imbued in politics from childhood. And as is not unfrequently the case with young men, I was sometimes shaken in my mind by opinions. I also thought that my duty towards my country had special claims upon me, such as could not be urged by other duties of life. Lastly, I conceived the hope that if I held some honorable office in the state, I might have secure helps and supports to aid my labors, with a view to the accomplishments of my destined task. With these motives, I applied myself to politics. Sir Nicholas Bacon died suddenly in 1579. He had intended to provide Francis with an estate, but death overreached his plans, and the young diplomat, called hurriedly to London, saw himself, at the age of 18, fatherless and penniless. He had become accustomed to most of the luxuries of the age, and he found it hard to reconcile himself now to a forced simplicity of life. He took up the practice of law while he importuned his influential relatives to advance him to some political office which would liberate him from economic worry. His almost begging letters had small result, considering the grace and vigor of their style and the proved ability of their author. Perhaps it was because Bacon did not underrate this ability and looked upon positions as his due that Burleigh failed to make the desired response. And perhaps also these letters protested too much the past, present, and future loyalty of the writer to the Honorable Lord. In politics, as in love, it does not do to give oneself wholly. One should at all times give, but at no time all. Gratitude is nourished with expectation. Eventually Bacon climbed without being lifted from above, but every step cost him many years. In 1583 he was elected to Parliament for Taunton, and his constituents liked him so well that they returned him to his seat in election after election. He had a terse and vivid eloquence in debate and was an orator without oratory. No man, said Ben Jonson, ever spoke more neatly, more compressedly, more weightily, or suffered less emptiness, less idleness in what he uttered. No member of his speech but consisted of its own graces. His hearers could not cough or look aside from him without loss. He commanded where he spoke. No man had their affections more in his power. The fear of every man that heard him was lest he should make an end. Enviable orator. One powerful friend was generous to him, that handsome Earl of Essex whom Elizabeth loved unsuccessfully and so learned to hate. In 1595, Essex, to atone for his failure in securing a political post for Bacon, presented him with a pretty estate at Twickenham. It was a magnificent gift, which one might presume would bind Bacon to Essex for life, but it did not. A few years later, Essex organized a conspiracy to imprison Elizabeth and select her successor to the throne. Bacon wrote letter after letter to his benefactor, protesting against this treason, and when Essex persisted, Bacon warned him that he would put loyalty to his queen above even gratitude to his friend. Essex made his effort, failed, and was arrested. Bacon pled with the queen in his behalf so incessantly that at last she bade him speak of any other subject. When Essex, temporarily freed, gathered armed forces about him, marched into London and tried to rouse its populace to revolution, Bacon turned against him angrily. Meanwhile, he had been given a place in the prosecuting office of the realm. And when Essex, again arrested, was tried for treason, Bacon took active part in the prosecution of the man who had been his unstinting friend. Essex was found guilty and was put to death. Bacon's part in the trial made him for a while unpopular, and from this time on he lived in the midst of enemies watching for a chance to destroy him. His insatiable ambition left him no rest. He was ever discontent, and always a year or so ahead of his income. He was lavish in his expenditures. Display was to him a part of policy. When at the age of 45 he married, the pompous and costly ceremony made a great gap in the dowry which had constituted one of the lady's attractions. In 1598 he was arrested for debt. Nevertheless, he continued to advance. His varied ability and almost endless knowledge made him a valuable member of every important committee. Gradually, higher offices were opened to him. In 1606, he was made Solicitor General. In 1613, he became Attorney General. In 1618, at the age of 57, he was at last Lord Chancellor.